Happy Saturday. Welcome back to the Pediatric Speech Sisters Show live. I am so excited to have our guest here today, Melissa Farkouh, correct?
Farkouh, yeah.
Farkouh. Okay, goodness gracious. So I'm especially grateful to have her on here today because she is multilingual. And so she is going to be adding a different perspective on cultural responsiveness and speech pathology. And I had to have you on here, Melissa, because I got to talk, and then hopefully we get to talk a lot about your the lunch talk that I got to join you on. And we got into a really great conversation about dynamic assessment. And she is a Canadian-based speech pathologist. So I really like to know how we can merge as speech pathologists internationally around the world, especially when it comes to cultural responsiveness. So would you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on. First of all, I'm really excited to be here. And as you said, I had you on a little while ago. I don't formally have a podcast yet, but yeah, I'll introduce myself. So my name is Melissa Farkouh. I'm a speech language pathologist here in Montreal, Canada, in Quebec, in the province of Quebec. And I do specialize working with children 0 to 6. I specialize particularly in working with multilingual children, developing my skills in dynamic assessment, and parent partnership is at the heart of all of my interventions.
Mm-hmm.
So I founded a private clinic in 2012. Well, not a clinic, private practice. And at that time, I was accompanying children and their parents in various establishments, working in daycares and telepractice and my home practice. And in the last few years, I've been really focusing more on doing workshops and trainings for other professionals. So special ed teachers, other speech pathologists, SLPAs. Over here, we don't have exactly that title, SLPAs, but we do have SLP type assistants to optimize their intervention, focusing on parent partnership again, because we know how powerful that can be, as well as best practices for working with multilingual, multicultural families. And I am also a mother of 2 children, and my kids are bilingual. I am trilingual. And so I really have at heart, cultural and linguistic diversity in my household as in my daily practice. So that's very important to me.
Thank you so much. I love to know how you embody that into your day-to-day life. So can you tell us what languages you speak and which languages you're teaching your children?
Yes. So I grew up, my parents are of Egyptian background. So I grew up in an Arabic, English, and French environment. Before I went to school, I knew all 3 languages. So I wouldn't say I'm the most fluent in Arabic, but I do have a good grasp on it. And I'm teaching my children French and English, and some Arabic, as well as some Italian, actually, because my husband is Italian. So we've got a lot of languages going on. And, the more the kids grow up and get interested in it, the more fun it becomes as well. And being able to like pass on that cultural part of it, the cultural part of the
Mhm.
language as well, and some of what I grew up with. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Well, let's get into the nitty-gritty of today's conversation.
Let's do
So
it.
could you so tell us actually a bit about your why. I don't think I got to ask you that yet. Can you tell us a bit about your why, what lights you up, and why do you keep doing what you do?
Yeah. So my why ties into like my personal life. I mean, I think before becoming a mother, I was always a very passionate SLP. I always wanted to help families. But my perspective grew, and it grew deeper, and it changed when I became a mother, because I realized having that different perspective as a parent, it made me be able to bask more in the position that the families that I'm working with are in as a parent, having to juggle all these different hats. And so my why lies in there, growing up in a, ethnic home, and being myself, teased sometimes for things that I would have in my lunchbox, and having a different language, being sometimes, facing linguicism where I would speak English at school, because here the majority language is French. I forgot to mention that. So I'm in a majority French city, province actually in Canada. Quebec is French majority language. And so I faced a lot of difficulties having preference speaking English and also having Arabic as a home language, although it's very multicultural here. So I have to also point that out, is that Montreal is a melting pot. And so as I grew into my career more and more, and I realized that most of the families that I'm working with, it really became a 50-50. I was working with a lot of French Canadian families, as well as a lot of multicultural, really representative Montreal, like new immigrant families, a lot of refugee families, working in different areas of Montreal. You might have a little pocket of different communities. So I started to realize that I'm not serving these families best. For example, I was getting referrals. I remember once in a daycare that was in a very multicultural, predominantly Indian area, where a lot of Indian families will settle in, and they find their community there. And they would refer to me families often, and these were children who were second or third language learners of French and were in their silent stage, and teachers were being had concerns. And so that was kind of a turning point. I remember going to this daycare and thinking, well, everything is great with this child. I would do parent interview, which changed a lot throughout the years, but I started interviewing the parents, and the parents had no concerns. And I said, you know what? Why don't you send me some home videos? And this is some things that I was doing when I was working one-on-one with families. And that approach also grew over time, the way I work with home videos and obtaining information from all the different environments. But I realized that the tests, or what I was bringing, wasn't really valid. It wasn't really giving me the information that I needed. And so I started to become much more interested, as I'm, a multilingual speaker, and I'm, giving multiple languages to my kids. And I started getting more interested in that, because I thought there's something that's not connecting. Like, this is not working, and I'm not best serving these families or the educators that are referring me these children. So I'm talking about childcare educators in the 0 to 6.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to know, how can I best support these educators who have questions or concerns, and how do I help them know, okay, when should I be concerned, or what could I do to help these children who arrive and don't speak the language? So I started really getting knee deep into all of the literature, and reading and attending seminars, and learning from my peers who are also multilingual SLPs. So sorry, it's a very long-winded why, but there's a lot of why in there. And as a mom too, like I said, I think that really struck me. Yeah.
And thank you for that, because my next question is, the topic is educational practices. And actually, let me pull it up. Educational practices for inclusion.
Yes.
So why would you say that topic is important to you? How do you connect with this topic?
Well, during the pandemic, we all know that there was a big movement socially with Black Lives Matter. And I came to a realization that I wasn't necessarily giving best practices or doing the best for my families, my BIPOC families that I was working with. And I had to take a step back and really rethink about my practices, and how I'm also working with, not only families, but teachers or educators that I'm supporting, who are working with these children who may or may not have a language disorder. And so I think the first thing that I took a deep, hard look at was the materials that I was using, the books that I was using. So that for me was like the first thing that I really had to look at. And I realized, yeah, wow, I guess I didn't really ever take a moment, or no one's ever told me, or I never had the realization that a lot of my dolls were not dolls of color. And then I started to look at, I went on a deep dive. I opened all the boxes and all the books and all the material that I had. And so just having, inclusive educational practices would be, at the very start looking at the kind of materials that you had. And one day I was in an assessment, and I had materials from the SLAM materials.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the pictures has an African American girl with like these beautiful big fro pom poms. And the little girl who came into the evaluation had the exact same hairdo that day. And the mom had tears in her eyes when she was like, "Oh my God, that's so sweet." Like the little girl even looks like her. I hadn't planned it, it just happened coincidentally, but it just shows the power of having, images and that represent so that kids can see themselves. I've had a lot of kids, flip through books now with me and be like, "Look, that's me." And I'm like, "Yes, that is you." you know
Oh.
and it goes both ways, not just with my BIPOC clients, but also with my white clients, like having diverse materials that they can play with and that they can see. I think that's a really big part of being inclusive. And then also, um, taking a lot of steps back to really take more time to listen to families and learn more about them, about their home practices. That's been a huge, I always did have like a parent interview and I always would kind of get to know them, but now I take more of that time straight from the get-go. And I feel like that's allowed me to connect much more with the families when I ask them questions about languages, of course, language exposure, language use, their belief systems also, and how they perceive different types of interactions or even just communication in general. I explain to them, how this kind of information can benefit me. And then this is going to tie right into my third point is the partnership that I create with the families. So that's kind of my shoe in to creating that connection with the families and with the child, is really immersing myself in their reality, their beliefs, their language, their culture, to get a better sense of how I can best support them, because it's really a partnership that we're building. And so I talked about, me having parent partnership at the heart of my practice. So parent partnership is basically going away from that top-down model, that medical model where like I'm the expert and you're coming here and I'm gonna help you, or I'm gonna prescribe something and then you'll go home and do what I say and then you'll come back. So I don't work like that anymore. Like it's been many, many years and it still continues to progress over the years. But this is the third part of where inclusion in education is important, is valuing the parent's role as the expert of their child. And that has totally changed every single interaction that I have with parents. When I tell them, "Hey, like I'm here to support you, but you're here to give me the information because you know your child best. And like, how can we work together? And like, what works best for you? And how do you see this?" And bringing them to tell me what it is that they want to work on, what it is that's difficult for them in their day-to-day, in different moments of the day, in different activities, and different types of interactions. And also learning about, is it actually with you that I need to be, or should we like include another member of the family because we're in a collective kind of community or culture. So those are like my top, inclusive practices, and these can be applied in any field. I think, in education, we're speaking about education because I work closely with childhood educators and or teachers. So yeah, those are my top, like that's a non-negotiable types of way of implementing my approach.
I really appreciate your team approach. I'm thinking about, collaborating with the parents, and then you also mentioned collaborating with the educators and teachers. So can you tell us best practices for collaboration, especially getting them on board with being more inclusive?
Yeah, so I think listening first to them, to their concerns, their questions, and showing them that we're there to best support them. I think the biggest pushback that we might get sometimes is that they may feel overwhelmed because they already have a lot on their plate. And so showing them how, and it's a little bit the same way that I work with parents when I'm doing parent partnership, is showing them how we can bring about little changes that can have a significant impact without actually going out of their way so much, or without really changing everything that they're doing, or having them build new material or stuff like that.
Mhm.
Okay, well, how about, let's say at the beginning of your school year, or when you have your new kiddos coming into your classroom, let's include some questions in your questionnaire, or get the parents involved to find out, where is everyone from? Is everyone from here, for example? What languages does everyone speak at home? And just getting that kind of information is getting them connected with the families, right? And it doesn't take much more than what they're already doing, because they're already going to be gathering information. They're probably already handing out some paperwork for parents to fill out. So I feel like that's a really good starting point. And I assess also everyone's openness. Everyone comes from a different place or with different views. So I try and adapt myself and not have any judgment on people, because I know that we all come from somewhere, and we all have to learn. And then once you know better, then you can do better. And
Mhm.
so I try and collaborate in that way, without, like I said, adding a load, but rather, hey, let's take a load off and see what are little impactful changes that we can bring in just creating a connection with the child, with the families. For example, not telling a child you can't speak that language here, but rather
Mhm.
say, oh, that's interesting. What language are you speaking, and where are you from? And I have like a whole bunch of activities, for example, that teachers can do, even in reading and writing, that they can implement, that value multiculturalism and that diversity in the classroom. So I have some teachers and educators that will say, Melissa, like, what do I need to get? Everyone comes from a different place. Some people might say, I want, give me resources, give me materials, give me activities. And like I said, I'm just going to bounce off wherever the person is coming from. When I have someone that might be a little bit more closed, or we might just start by debunking a lot of the myths, and I might just be providing information on like what multilingualism actually looks like, because sometimes I'm working with educators or teachers who are monolingual themselves. So when you don't have that experience and you've grown up in a predominantly monolingual family or neighborhood, it's hard to understand that as well. So I feel like having that coming from that background has also allowed me to understand it more
Mhm.
readily. Yeah. But even so, I find like sometimes parents or educators who are bilingual, multilingual, they still have those myths. They'll still
Mhm.
say, well, I think this child is having difficulties because they have this and this and that language. And then sometimes I'll say, well, hey, don't you speak this and this and this language? And they'll say, well, yeah. And I said, well, did you experience any difficulties growing up? Oh, well, no. So, okay. So, we can acquire it just as easily as a monolingual.
Mhm.
There are some things we want to look out for. So I'm there to support them, maybe look at, are there any red flags? Like, what is it that we should be looking for? And how can we be open and accepting, of this diversity?
These are amazing practices that you're bringing to the forefront, and I would love to ask you about the article that you co-wrote. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so it's an article written in French. It's in a French publication journal, sorry, called Rééducation orthophonique, from a company called Ortho Édition. So Ortho Édition has like games, materials, and then they also have their scientific publication called Rééducation orthophonique, which essentially means intervention in speech language pathology. And so I was approached by a researcher in France. We kind of connected on social media, and he specializes in parent partnership. He actually coined the term parent partnership in French, and to differentiate between parental guidance, parental coaching, and parent partnership. So he, in his literature, he like distinguishes these three levels of how we can accompany parents and what the differences are over here. And when we get to the parent partnership level, I spoke about it earlier, it's taking away that top-down medical model, and where we're really getting on the same level as the families and putting them, or valuing their role as the expert of their child, and our role as the expert of language and communication, and merging those two together, and really having active involvement from the families in the intervention, in the assessment, in the intervention planning, in the goal, in selecting goals, and then in how the intervention takes place with us there all along, bringing them along the way and holding hands, basically. So the article that we wrote was to talk about our practices here in Quebec. So I co-wrote it with a colleague of mine, Lauriane Lacerte, who is also a speech-language pathologist here in Montreal. Actually, not in Montreal. She's in Quebec. She's a little bit, she's out of the city. But we brought in our two expertise, where she has a program that is 100% virtual. She never meets the children. She only meets the parents. And I brought in my expertise working with multilingual families and how we can best serve multilingual families to create that parent partnership, and then be able to really see significant changes in the child, because we know that intensity and not just intensity, but frequency and intensity, the two words I was looking for, frequency and intensity, are really important in intervention. There's, mixed, it's mixed on how much frequency and how much intensity, but we know that when it's more frequent and shorter, it's more beneficial. And when it's in more naturalistic setting, then it's ecological and it's even better this way. So we co-wrote this article to talk about those kinds of practices here that I've been talking about this whole time, like how to conduct. So my part focused a lot on how to conduct an interview with parents, how to, have open-ended questions and be open and create that connection with the family, and kind of skipping over just sending a form, but really having like an ethno-linguistic interview with parents, and going from there. And then how to work with different situations, like I said, when it's more of like a collective culture, when you have when we say it takes a village. So like, okay, have we thought about what can I do if it's not the primary caregiver, the parents that are the primary caregivers? Should I be thinking about including an auntie or a grandma or a cousin, or having someone join into the session? If in their culture, I've had a lot of families be able to easily tell me, I don't really play with my kid. It's more, the cousins or the kids, they all play together. And I said, okay, so how can we adapt to this type of situation? So I described all of these different questions and measures that we can take to work and adapt ourselves to these diverse families that we work with, and not assume that, our view on language and our way of doing things is the one and only, because it's very like Eurocentric, if you want, the way we kind of conduct interviews and the way we ask questions. Here in Canada, we have the Aboriginal, the Inus, and we have a lot of First Nations people. And we have some speech pathologists that work up north with these communities. And there's a lot to consider when working with these communities. There's a lot of work to be done, and it takes a long time to connect. And you got to really get into the social affairs and be within the community to gain the trust of the community. And asking direct questions is not something that's very forthcoming or seen as appropriate. So it's like, how do we work around these different barriers, let's say, or these differences in cultural behavior as well?
Yeah,
So
and
the article touches on all of that.
that is my question. How do you work around those different social behaviors? So, for example, there are questions where, as a clinician, especially if you do have that culture responsive hat on, and that just those critical interview questions that you need to ask, those
Yeah,
ethnocentric, oh my gosh, I can't, ethnographic interview questions that you need to ask.
yeah,
Now, I will say this also. I don't know, even myself, I went to a predominantly Black institution for both undergrad and graduate school,
yeah.
and cultural responsiveness was embedded in our curriculum. But I don't know if we explicitly learned about ethnographic interviewing. And so, what would you say are three critical questions that we could ask our parents to make sure that we are including their culture and just overall being inclusive from the assessment process? So I'm kind of speaking from the lens of speech pathology. So
Yeah,
just want to consider the educators as well, but
yeah.
also, from the assessment process, from the kind of like the counseling process when we're telling them
Mhm.
how their children are doing, and the intervention process overall.
Three critical questions. That's a really good question because honestly, I think I adapt my questions. I have a lot of like I have a basis of questions that I may or may not ask, but kind of the way we're interviewing right now is that my follow-up questions will be based on how parents respond. But I think, um, and this may not come into education. So, well, it may and may not, it depends. But I find it's really important to find out what their day to day looks like, who's interacting with who, and who is the child spending time with, who are significant people in this child's life. And often I'll get, grandma spends a lot of time with this kid, or auntie spends a lot of time, or uncle, or I have a lot of families that live in a multi-generational home where there's an uncle who's very present. And so finding out how the importance of these people in this child's life, and how we can include them. And if the parents would like that, I ask the parents, what's most important to them for their child.
Mhm.
They're coming to talk to us about language if the concerns come from the family. But I'll ask them, what is the most important to you? Because sometimes they'll come to me and say, we've been recommended to only focus on the majority language. And often it's coming from a place of they want to do the best thing for their child, especially if it's new immigrant families. They're like, okay, they're laser focused. They're like, we want to, immerse our child in the French language. We have to. It's also for their survival that they have to learn French. They don't have a choice. They come here, they have to learn because they need to work, because they need to put food on the table. So not so much a question, but I think I'm going to emphasize a lot how important it is for them to maintain their home language, while listening to their concerns about school, maybe upcoming, since I'm working with more preschool age children, um, and telling them how, yes, majority language is important, but that their child will inevitably learn the language, and how maintaining their culture and that exchange with their child. And I'll bring up expressions that I know, if it's within, I've had like Algerian families, I've worked with many like different Arabophone families. Sorry, that might have been a French word that I just used, but
I
anyways.
think I think so. I think so. I nodded like I knew, but in my head, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna have to look up that word.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do that sometimes. That's my bilingual brain here, but I'll give them examples of expressions that we have in Arabic that you just can't translate. And I
Yeah.
said, well, if you wanted to say this term of endearment to your child, like there's a term that says like, you're my soul. It
Mhm.
sounds very nice in English, sounds very poetic, but you just can't take it away. If you say it in Arabic, you can't say it in English. I can tell you what it means, but it just doesn't really mean the same thing unless I said it in Arabic. So I
Mhm.
may give examples of these types of things to really emphasize how important the language and how you can't, take it out of the culture and the identity. And parents are often it's like I took a weight off their shoulders when I tell them it's okay not to be focused on French and we can put some things in place if we need to, but that this child will be getting support in French regardless.
Mhm.
And then how to work around differences. Again, I think being open, listening is the most important. That's something I've had to work on. It's not coming through yet. I'm a very chatty Kathy. It's in my nature. It was in my family. We're very, like, if you ever got together with me and my family, we're very loud, we're very loving, we're very expressive people. So that's how I grew up. And so I'll hone that in a bit, when I have families that I work with that are very quiet and very reserved, like I'll hone it in a little bit and I'll try and like meet them halfway because that's not exactly how I have a hard time, but really listening, asking questions and truly listening to the answer, letting them know that I'm here to support them, and often helping with things that are not necessarily related immediately to speech and language intervention. For example, I had a mom who had a complicated background. They kind of bounced around from country to country before they arrived in Canada. And so the child had been exposed, yes, to a home language, but to a bunch of other languages. There were a lot of changes that occurred since the child had been born and arrived to this daycare. And in Canada, we have free healthcare, but in order to access the public system and be able to get early intervention, or where they support families and give them strategies, you have to have your Medicare card.
Mm,
And
mhm.
so um, I was mandated by a daycare because I go to this daycare and they said, we have this family and the mom's open and she has some concerns. So I meet with the family and um, I tell the mom that the child has a language disorder, and then I said, okay, so here are the next steps. And the mom seemed like she didn't really know what to do or where to go in the medical system. It could be really complicated. So I said, well, you need, the Medicare card. And one of the educators at the daycare said to me, we don't have a medical card on hand yet. The mom keeps telling us that it's in process, but we don't have it. So when everyone left and it was just me and the mom, I asked the mother, and it turns out that she had sent it. I think there was maybe some language things going on with the parent as well. Maybe in terms of reading and writing, there might have been some difficulties at that level, which we can also see sometimes from how they fill out the forms or the types of answers they provide. So I kind of picked up on that, and I asked the mom if she would like my help to fill out these forms for her child to get his Medicare card, because he needed it. He needed to go see a doctor for his regular checkups. He needed the card to go in so she can go and request services, because it's the daycare that basically mandates me. So the daycare pays me, and then I give the parents, the next steps where they can go and access services. So that's the kind of thing that you want to stay open to and realize that, yes, I'm a speech pathologist and that's my hat, but in educational practices as well, sometimes families just need help. They just need a hand, or they just need someone to listen to them. And so just a simple gesture of taking that extra 20 minutes out of my schedule to the mom gave me the paper. Like, she brought everything. She was so thankful. She said, yes, yes. And
Mhm.
she brought me all the paperwork and I checked. And I think the address she had sent it to might have been wrong, but regardless. So we sent in the papers. I gave her the sealed envelope and I said, okay, go and drop it in the mailbox. And she called me or emailed me a little while later and said, I got the Medicare card. And she was so happy. So those are the kinds of things that we can sometimes do for families, because especially coming to a new country as new immigrants, I don't know if you've had that experience. Maybe you can share, but just teasing out the medical system can be really complicated, and they don't have the means to pay for private services. So I'm that point of contact where someone else is, because I'm a private practitioner, paying for the services. And then I want to make sure that I'm giving them as much as I can so that they can leave and start on this kind of journey of getting services for their child as well.
I think that that's incredible because I'm just thinking about when you really connect to your why and why you're doing this, it's easy to take those extra 20 minutes out of your schedule because it's just a part of who you are. It's like the power
Right.
of your intention. And so, even though that was one family who did this, or who you did this for, I think that it sends a ripple effect. So first of all, the people in your daycare who sees the extra steps that you took to make sure that that happened, and then also perhaps maybe that family was able to help their family or friends who came into Canada with that process, and so it
Yeah.
overall just sends that ripple effect of care, which
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
the
So
essence of what we do.
exactly. It care. Yeah. I take it very much at heart. And so sometimes the families are not disposed yet to be talking about intervention or strategies because there's all these other things going on. And I think that if we can offer them some other type of support, that's really important too. So making a
Mhm.
phone call for them sometimes when they don't speak the language. I've done that, I've done these types of things many times, and the families are really grateful, and it doesn't take much more out of my, yes, busy schedule, but it has a huge impact because they can't otherwise move forward and get on to those next steps. So I
Mhm.
think that that's important to, and if we're listening to the families, like I said, if we're really taking the time to listen, um, as educators, as teachers, I think we can have a big impact, if we just take that extra time.
I think I'll probably need to have you on here again to talk about how we could care for immigrant families, because that is a whole other topic in and of
Yeah,
itself, but I'm just thinking about the impact and thinking about, from start to finish, their journey into that new country and the barriers that they face, and maybe the people who they met who haven't been so kind,
yeah,
and so, when they get to us, they might already be a little bit fatigued or nervous or whatever. So the fact that you are able to serve as someone who can bridge that gap, like, hey, we're not everyone in healthcare, everyone in education, we actually do want to see you and your child succeed. We actually do have
exactly.
your needs in mind with everything that we do.
Yeah,
So that does lead me to our final question. What
yeah.
changes would you like to see in our industry?
Oh gosh, so many.
Yeah, I know, right? Everyone
Um,
said so many, so many changes.
so I had you want to talk about this, but I think, as speech pathologists, dynamic assessment is so important. We didn't talk like, okay, sorry. Let's roll back a little bit. So I think in the schooling system, in the master's program where we're training, um, open our doors to have more diverse students come into the field because, not, I think people of color will be best serving also these clients, these multicultural, these multicultural families that we work with. So I think it's also easier to be able to serve some of these families if we're including more diverse people in our field.
Mhm.
So backing up, all the way there, and then like how the program is built. You went to a predominantly all Black university, right? So you had that built into the program. We didn't. I had a few people of color in my class. We were a very small cohort. We were only 25 in my master's,
Mhm.
program. So very, very small. After I graduated, every year Canada wanted every single university to increase their how many students they were accepting. So including, classes on, ethnographic interviewing and, best practices on working with multilingual families. Because I mean, we're in Montreal. One out of two families that you're going to meet are going to have more than one language at home. It's literally a given, and it's not just going to be. I feel like in the U.S. it's like Spanish English, but here it's could be any language,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
so my goal, and then this is also part of my why, more of my why was eventually to be like, okay, well, I want to stop getting those phone calls where families are like, yeah, I was with a speech pathologist, but they only spoke French. So they realized that, maybe they weren't best placed to serve me. I want them to feel empowered to be able to serve these families, even if we don't speak the home language. 90% of the time, I don't speak the family's home language, but there are ways that we can work in partnership with these families. So I think also, veering away from the medical model for different settings, teaching something that's different than that medical model, I think will be really important in order to be more inclusive and diverse in our practices and in the field.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you. Thank you so, so much. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you? And I would like for you to talk a little bit about your lunch and greets.
Yes. Okay. So for Better Speech and Hearing Month, I don't officially have a podcast yet, but I decided for the third year in a row to have guests on. And this year we spoke about dynamic assessment. You were one of my lovely guests. Thank you. So I invited a lot of my colleagues from near and far in the field to talk to me about best practices and dynamic assessment, because I think this is something, I think it should be an entire course in and of itself in the master's program. So that's another change I'd like to see included in there. So I did that for Better Speech and Hearing Month. The videos will be up soon on my YouTube channel. But for now, you can find me on Facebook or Instagram. It's the same handle. It's a French handle, though. It's motpourmot.orthophonie. It's going to be changing soon. Actually, I'm currently shifting my website and everything because I'm translating everything to have all my content in French and English, because a lot of my tools are available in French and English, but not the actual blogs and all of that. So I almost feel like putting out my new handle, even though it's only going to be live in September, but it will soon be melissafarkouh.com. And then you'll be able to find a lot of my tools that I create for working with bilingual families, resources, blogs that I have out there. We're in the process of translating all of it using AI, but then I'll be like glossing over everything, making sure that everything is conform and that there's nothing language related. Whatever needs to be adjusted will be adjusted. So motpourmot.orthophonie, maybe you can put the handle because it will be difficult to hear it out. So it actually means word for word speech therapy. But I am a solopreneur now. And so that's why I'm shifting my business, and I want to make sure that everything is available in French and English. So
amazing, amazing. Thank you. And yes, when I post this replay officially, I will of course reach out to you and just double check on your Instagram handles and website and everything. And then I will definitely be sure to update that as you give us your official rebrand. So, well, thank you so much, Melissa, for coming on and talking to us. And thank you everyone who came live and those of you watching the replay. And we will see you again next week.
Thank you so much, Melanie.